Hello and welcome to our discussion of community engagement around 5G deployment as part of the UK5G Place Hub programme. I'm Rick Robinson, I'm Director of Smart Places for Jacobs and here to introduce the panel and the discussion. So what we've learned about 5G so far is that successful deployment really requires a community to work together, both on the physical deployment of infrastructure and on the adoption and usage of 5G. We've got an exciting panel here today to share their experiences of doing that. We have Sharon Wagg, Research Associate at Lancaster University, working on the Many project. We've got Colin Wood in the Digital Place team at Dorset Council, Programme Manager for the 5G Rural Dorset programme. And we've got Callum Jones from Nottinghamshire Council's Digital Engagement team, working on the 5G Connected Forest project. So firstly, over to Sharon. I think you've done some research work on community engagement for 5G. What have you learned about how to get engagement started, who it is that you need to connect with and how you go about doing it?
Thanks very much, Rick. So yes, so as part of the Many project, we felt it was really important to be inclusive. And so that was very much about engaging the community. So it wasn't just us like telling them what we were doing as the project, but it was actually us listening to what they had to say. So they may have had some questions and it was about us really listening to what they had and those like concerns, but also feeding that information so that the community thoughts back to the project to really inform the project and in a way shape the project going forward as well. And how we've gone about that is we've done interviews working with the community. These were meant to be face-to-face, but obviously then we had like lockdown. So then we did quite a few of them online or by phone, because obviously we were working with a very rural like community. And the whole point of the project is that we're sort of working in an area where there's either no like mobile phone service, very poor like connectivity with regards to like broadband. So some of those interviews couldn't be done by like Teams or Skype because they just didn't have that like connectivity. So then they had to be done by phone. And so we had the whole process of doing that, but also doing events as well. So we did like events online, and then when we were allowed during COVID, we actually did some in-person engagement as well. We learned a lot through that process. Community engagement is not easy, and you should be very much sort of aware and prepared of it's not just one community with one voice. This is lots of people who have lots of different thoughts and like perspectives, and it's really important to kind of like capture that. So off the back of this sort of learning, we like developed a toolkit, which is going to be like available on the UK5G on our website, which kind of goes through the processes that we've actually gone through and also shares some of the tools and mechanisms that we used with regards to doing that engagement, but also sharing that information with the community, but also with the project more broadly. Because we're all coming at this from different like perspectives. I'm obviously working in like research. We've got people who are working on like the technical side. We've got people working from a local authority. So everybody has their own thoughts and like perspectives on that. So when we're talking about community engagement, it's the local community, but also the wider like community as part of the project and more broadly with other like 5G projects. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, Sharon. I think that gives a great view. And what I take away from that particularly is your comments around the great variety of different stakeholders in the community that we need to engage with, from formal institutions like a local authority, university looking at research, the MNOs, through to the general public, and you know the variety that is inherent in our communities of people in place. So I think that's really insightful. Thank you. I think next, Colin, would you like to give your perspective from that in Dorset Council? And particularly, I think you've been very focused on a rural community that's had very poor connectivity in the past. How's that worked for you?
Yeah, so thank you. Well, we came at this from a similar angle. You know, early meaningful engagement with stakeholders was the kind of bedrock of our project, really. We did some workshops with residents, businesses, and even elected councillors, because you get everybody in your communities on side from the very outset. It makes it a lot easier to deliver a complex and kind of advanced project like this. So we looked at it, you know, around the early days of 5G. Early days, 5G was dubbed as a bit of a kind of solution looking for a problem to solve. So in Dorset, we kind of turned that on its head. We wanted to run this series of community workshops, asking organisations and communities what their challenges were. Don't think about 5G. Think about what challenges your communities face. And then we took that away and we looked at how 5G could potentially help with that. So our R&D project is called 5G Rural Dorset. And what we found is that you stack all those kind of problems and the use cases associated with them on top of each other. So that could be a lack of basic connectivity for residents, which we do suffer from in Dorset. The inability of the emergency services to operate effectively in kind of really remote coastal areas, the needs of farmers, and you stack all those together, and the investment in those kind of next generation connectivity networks, if they're deployed sensitively, kind of begins to make sense. And if you involve local people and organisations from the outset, and you're using the technology to solve their kind of real world problems rather than something that we think is a good idea, that provides a really strong platform for the project. That's what we found.
Thanks very much, Colin. I think that's really insightful about taking a challenge-led approach, and about how the needs of, you know, very disparate stakeholders, from farmers to the emergency services to GPs, you can aggregate that demand, it adds up to a case to do something to answer it, and to address, you know, the challenge of securing deployment in a rural context, which is something I think we all know a little bit about. I might also ask, I mean, you've mentioned the importance of engaging early, and I think one of the reasons for doing so is around the concerns that exist around the safety of 5G. Now, I'm a scientist by background and actually have a background in microwave engineering as it goes. I'm really, really confident that there isn't a health issue to do with 5G, but obviously there's a genuine concern there that there is one. Would you be able to comment on, you know, perhaps how you've addressed that, and how some of the material recently made available by DCMS and UK5G can help with it?
Yeah, actually, we've seen very little concern in our area, and I'd like to think that's partly as a result of the community engagement we did early on, which I've talked about. I think what I would say is those fears are kind of very real for some people, and they need to be addressed directly yet sensitively. And you've said, you know, the clear messaging that's been made available through DCMS and UK5G and Public Health England provides a really good basis on which to go forward with those communications. I just think that, you know, fear often results from misunderstanding, or perhaps only hearing one side of a story, and that sometimes is caused by a lack of information. So early, meaningful engagement backed by consistent and engaging communications throughout the project is the key to this for me.
Thank you again, and I think, you know, that absolutely. Pardon me, I've lost the word. Let me start again. Crispin, could you perhaps count me in again?
Of course.
Yep. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Thanks, Colin, and really interesting, and that has a lot of echoes of things that we've heard through the UK5G Connected Places Working Group. A similar story of if you engage with people, take their concerns seriously, do it early, use the clear messaging, then, you know, that helps to bring everybody along to understand that 5G is of a benefit and doesn't have any health risks associated with it. So really interesting to hear that was your experience. Maybe perhaps to move on to a specific aspect of 5G deployment and adoption, and to look at business adoption. You know, because, you know, adopting 5G as consumers is something that we quite naturally are doing because we like the extra bandwidth, we want to stream videos, etc. But what about businesses and how they manage adoption of 5G, and how they can prioritize it alongside all the other things that businesses are wrestling with at the moment? Callum, I wonder if you could perhaps give us some insight into how that's worked in your work in Nottinghamshire and with the Connected Forest project.
Thanks, Rick. And I'm really happy that this section here comes after the comments on community engagement with Colin and Sharon, because I think they're really closely linked. So in terms of 5G Connected Forest, we work with a range of partners, both within the project and external to it. Within the project itself, many of them are SMEs with little to no experience in working with 5G prior to them coming onto the project. So they belong to industries which we think there's an opportunity to deliver using use cases powered by the connectivity of 5G. So part of the purpose of the 5G testbed and trials program is to maximise that opportunity, deliver the productivity and efficiency benefits. And that requires engaging with a range of businesses about the adoption of new and emerging technologies, which at times can be a very difficult conversation, because the adoption of new technologies often comes with it, a financial cost associated. Particularly when we're talking about SMEs, they don't always feel they have the capacity to take that leap. So, like Colin said, and Sharon, early engagement, having those difficult conversations early with them and bringing them on board. So we work with a range of different partners, including SMEs, academic institutions, people that focus on visitor attraction experiences. One of our partners, GUI Limited, they tend to focus on web development and app development, and now we're bringing them into a world of developing AR content. I hate using this phrase world first, but the research and development that they've been allowed to do within our project has allowed them to develop the world's first interactive holographic movie, something that you wouldn't be able to do. They simply wouldn't have the concept of taking a look at if it wasn't within the project. So I think business adoption doesn't just stop at the extremities of the project either. We're deploying a network in an area of Sheriff Forest, which has got specific scientific interest attached to it. So we've had to manage that relationship with various stakeholders, range from RSC through to Natural England. And it's really critical that these organisations with different cultures and operations be brought on board to understand just what we're doing. So if we're able to actually deploy, there's not those barriers for them adopting the technologies after the culmination of the project itself. So we need to have those conversations about what commercialisation opportunities are available during the lifespan of the project. So when that comes to a close, they're in a position to make that decision about what the next steps are.
Interesting, and I think I've got some possible follow-ups for later on in the discussion. But before we get to that, Colin, would you like to give a view from your experience engaging with businesses in the 5G Rural Dorset programme?
So some of our networks, such as one that we've deployed at a local innovation park in Dorset, they're there to allow small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, to work with others that perhaps they wouldn't ordinarily get access to develop new products and services with potentially scalability across the whole of the UK. So an example would be, we've installed a 5G standalone network inside the Army's new £5 million battle lab, which is in Dorset. And this allows SMEs to work with the military to innovate around military and civilian applications also. So giving them opportunities to use 5G to develop their businesses from perhaps an enterprise employing 1 or 2 people and scaling it up to a much bigger enterprise. Not all down to the 5G network, but in the first 10 years, that facility, the Battle Lab, aims to create 90 new local jobs. Why does Dorset Council think that's a good thing? Clearly, it's bringing skilled jobs and exciting opportunities to innovate to our county, and that provides, puts us in a place where people would hopefully be excited and interested in moving their businesses to Dorset and creating new opportunities for our young people, keeping them in the county rather than having to leave and get jobs in the cities, etc. So yeah, all fantastic opportunities provided by 5G and the 5G testbeds and trials program that we're part of.
Thanks for that, Colin. Really interesting to hear about the attraction of the investment that you've made in the region in 5G in different ways to business, to creating jobs, creating economic growth through those new activities. What perhaps occurs to me next is then the subject of inclusion, and how as a community we help to ensure that everybody in the community is in a position to benefit from those investments, whether that's the investment in the 5G network in the first place, or whether it's the jobs that are created by businesses using it. And I know this is something that, Sharon, you've done a lot of work on at Lancaster University. Do you want to sort of help us understand how you've explored that topic of inclusion around 5G?
Yeah, so basically I just completed a PhD at Loughborough University on digital inclusion, and that's then brought me on working onto the project at Lancaster. So it's been fantastic. So my research is basically informing the project. And so looking at both like projects, basically what I mean, thinking about like digital inclusion, it's almost like two strands that you have to think about. There's kind of, you're thinking about kind of infrastructure, so sort of having the broadband in place and good quality like broadband and like connectivity, and people also having access to like devices, and then what that then brings for organizations and individuals and the community. But then on the other side of that, you also think about people's skills and their motivation to actually want to use like technology and digital, and perhaps as some people have never really had the opportunity to use it before, or they don't see the relevance of it. And so it's certainly through the research that I was doing and like doing now, certainly with having poor like quality connectivity, particularly in like a rural area, that really hampers individuals to be able to like participate in the world on to be able to access different services and online services, but also as well for like organizations to be able to kind of grow and expand and thrive. And obviously that then can have a whole impact on a community as well. So it's very much a multi-layered, quite a complex issue. But then the flip side of that is if people aren't online or haven't got the access, it then can affect things like their social like mobility as well, and being able to move forward with education and with organizations and like with work as well. And so it in lots of ways it comes back to culture. So it comes back to like an organizational like culture, and if they are ready to take on like tech and like digital, and that includes moving then further on with like 5G, but also with regards to individuals as well, and the issues of, okay, so if they can go online and if they can access online services, are they aware of perhaps the kind of more like negative aspects of like going online as well, and like being safe online and cyber like security? So there's a whole host of things to think about, but certainly from our project we had lots of stories of people really struggling to use like connectivity, and the impact that had on them doing anything from doing a home shop, which might take us literally 10 minutes, for somebody taking them like an hour and a half. And this issue was something that was important before COVID, and has almost sort of that kind of impact has really increased during COVID. And as we're like experienced now, that increased reliance on people having to sort of go online and doing a home shop, doing work online, working from home as well, that has a real impact as well. So yeah, that's kind of very much like an overview of like some of the issues that we need to think about when we're talking about inclusion, and also thinking a bit more about skills and having the right skills, but also thinking a bit more deeper about not just being able to use a computer and use an online system. It's actually thinking a bit more like critically about how they look at information and use that information as they move forward.
Thank you, Sharon. I mean, that's really interesting and insightful, and interesting that you sort of covered a lot of things there around connectivity, around motivation, around individuals and business, and particularly around skills. And I think the skills agenda is a really challenging one at the moment. The World Economic Forum last year published a Future of Jobs 2020 report, where they predicted that 44% of the activities that form jobs today will be transformed by digital technology by 2025. That's an astonishingly deep and rapid transformation, and I think it translates directly into the skills agenda. And Callum, I know in Nottinghamshire you've been working specifically on a programme on the skills agenda. How has that worked for you? Why did you do it, and what is it that you've done?
For leading me into that. So I think what the points that Sharon's made on the multi-layered facet of it is really important in the matter of this. And as you said, I think that the two strands, digital skills and inclusion, are inherently linked, almost codependent. You can't focus on one without drawing attention to the other. So in terms of what we've been doing in 5G Connected Forest, we've actually been developing. We've been saying, hey, look, this 5G revolution is coming. It's going to happen. It's a case of when, if not if. So what are we going to do to ensure that the current workforce is ready for that revolution, but then the workforce of the future also has the support. So when they come into an industry, they're not having to retrain and learn new skills, that they're ready to enter the industry. So we're saying that it's going to change industries that we've got. Years ago, no one could see that happening, and now all of a sudden people are looking at innovative use cases going, could we get that into our business? That's the speed at which 5G is moving into certain industries, particularly, you look at the creative industry, and I just think about the work that the 5G Connected Forest is doing in augmented reality. That will really come to the forefront. I also think it's important to focus on the role of 5G in terms of everything from the nitty-gritty of the civils of actually delivering the network, all the way to workforce in terms of how can the people who work in the visitor economy, how can they use use cases linked to 5G to revolutionise their businesses. So we've developed basically a skills workshop that's worked with a number of local education institutions, aiming to work with school children and school leavers about how 5G use cases will change industry. So we're looking at things like augmented and virtual reality, autonomous vehicles becoming norm, the Internet of Things, the scope of that becoming wider than it's ever been before, machine learning, AI, haptics. These are all industries which a few years ago that there wasn't the infrastructure to support it, and now it is becoming the norm. So they're going to be at the forefront of the digital revolution. It's also going to help develop a process of innovative thinking. How can Nottinghamshire County Council, as the local authority, support that? We want people to think big. We want to explore the art of the possible, if that's not too much of a salesy pitch. But so we developed a careers pilot with Westmont College, which puts business and computer science students together into a real world challenge. So looking at things like, hey, how can you use technology to promote and protect Sherwood Forest? How do we create new opportunities for the businesses that exist in these areas and help them create their own 5G inspired ideas? So we had a range of entries ranging from using things like drones to protect the forest, kind of what we're looking at in 5G Connected Forest, augmented reality remote control experiences. So people who aren't necessarily get out to these visitor attractions, how can they be included, all the way through to utilising 5G connections to monitor waste levels on bins to ensure they're collected in a timely manner. So it's this type of engagement and opportunity which prevents people with a sense that, okay, that is something that I could look at, that might be something for me. And previously that wasn't an opportunity because I didn't know that it existed. If we want Nottinghamshire to be a great place for innovative ideas to flourish, we need to ensure that there is the environment for that, and that comes with both infrastructure and the skills and inclusion associated with it. And I think what the colleagues on the call have highlighted today is early engagement is absolutely, it's a requirement. You need to do it early to ensure you've got that buy-in.
So thank you, Callum. I think that's really insightful experience from your work in Nottinghamshire. And it tempts me to sort of go back. Now we've explored some of the characteristics of how we carry out programs to get 5G deployed and adopted, to think back all the way to how it gets started within a community. How is it that 5G deployment initiatives are created between the stakeholders there, the local authority and other elements of the community? Sharon, I think this is something that you've covered in your research work. How's that played out from what you see?
Oh, thank you, Rick. Yeah, I mean, certainly drawing on my research that I did when I did my PhD, because I was very much looking at digital inclusion initiatives. Some were 5G, some weren't. But just to give an overview really of what I found, and certainly what we've been finding in the many projects, is this sort of very much this kind of importance to have this joined up thinking. So whether that's from government talking to local authorities, talking to working with the community. So certainly from working at the many project, this is something that we found has been really important, is to work with the community and then actually to share that knowledge with the local authority and the other partners working in the project, and then obviously sharing that knowledge more widely. From my PhD research, it was very much felt that it was very important to have a forum, to have a place where this kind of information could be shared. So having kind of mechanisms in place for knowledge sharing is kind of really crucial for this. So there's not not one organization will have all the knowledge. It's actually trying to share that across, and then really trying to generate that joined up thinking for the wider community, which can then inform the tech organizations, which can then inform local authorities and work that way through that. So hopefully that makes a bit of sense.
It does, absolutely. And I think, really important part of what you've just said there is to have those structures and mechanisms in place for those very cross-sectoral local discussions to take place, so that a common understanding, a common initiative can be convened between those stakeholders, no matter who it is that leads it in each particular place. Colin, from your perspective in Dorset, how did those things play out to lead to your initiative, and how have they supported the project as you've taken it forward?
Yeah, so Dorset Council, which is the authority I work for, leads the 5G Rural Dorset project. And when I was asked to write a bid for the funding to do it, it was kind of local authorities don't do telecoms. That's not what we do. But the more I think about it, we build roads. We don't have any motorways in Dorset, and people have poor connectivity. If the digital sort of infrastructure we've put in place, and we need to keep putting in place into the future, is the roads of the future, if that makes sense. So it's not such a strange thing for a local authority to do, I would suggest. And I've worked in local government for 20 odd years. I'm really passionate about the part that local authorities can play in making areas better places to live, work and visit. And this just is a really exciting future facing way of giving local people, local businesses and people who want to come and spend time here the infrastructure and the connectivity they need to do whatever they want to do, whether that's work from home, whether that's visit a beautiful tourism spot and be able to do something as prosaic as post something on Instagram, or whether that's building businesses that are fit for the future, have the opportunity to offer well-paid, interesting, highly skilled jobs to our local people. So it really does fit with the local authority agenda. And once we started to think about it in those terms, becoming involved in something as kind of strange, if you like, as 5G and next generation mobile connectivity really did start to make sense to our leadership, and they've been nothing but supportive ever since.
That's really interesting to hear. And I think one of the things that we've remarked on in the Connected Places Working Group several times that I think you've just reflected there is that changing role and stance of local authorities towards telecommunications. And it's increasingly important for a local authority to have an active stance driving the strategy for telecommunications for the area, fixed and 5G connectivity. And Callum, in Nottinghamshire, how has that worked out for you?
Yeah, so not to simply paraphrase what Colin's touched on there, but we are a local authority with a very large county, and the difference in our areas, both demographically and topography, they vary. We have very rural, hard to reach areas of Nottinghamshire. We have very urbanised bits of Nottinghamshire. The important part for us was, as Colin said, to achieve buy-in from our leadership and be supported in that way. You very quickly gain a sense of if you raise something within a local authority, whether it has that leadership support or otherwise. And I'm delighted to say that digital connectivity in Nottinghamshire, it's been on the agenda for the past 12, 13 years where it started with broadband delivery through the functions of BD UK and the contracts that are associated with it then. And that has kind of lended itself nicely into where we are now, looking at 5G technology adoptions. All the way through from the infrastructure, because we sit within the place department. We're determined to deliver places that people want to raise a family, where they want to start a business, where they want to grow old, and they need that infrastructure, just like they need roads. They need digital connectivity to be able to facilitate that. So Nottinghamshire County Council is a place where we've had that buy-in. We have a digital connectivity team. We're not going anywhere. That's a team that strategically looks at how do we deploy infrastructure to develop these places to make Nottinghamshire the best place it possibly can be, whether that's people within Nottinghamshire or, as Colin touched on, bringing that investment from outside. How do we bring that in? And we've got to say, hey, we're open for innovation, for investment, and for opportunity.
That's great, Callum. Really interesting to hear And what a benefit that connectivity team, the digital team, must have been to Nottinghamshire in being prepared to take advantage of the 5G deployment that you've now got underway. So I think we're coming close to the end of our time for the panel discussion. I might just offer a few reflections on what I think you've all said. We've seen, I think, that local investment in 5G is an attractor to business investment and job creation. So clear advantages to do it, but important to start engaging with a community early so that it really can be based on the community's needs rather than be driven by technology. That engagement then including a variety of different stakeholders, from local authorities to businesses, from researchers to residents. There are local and national stakeholders, and we need to look to both large corporations and MNOs, but also to SMEs, and it's the public and the private sector. So it's a very broad, and that makes it crucially important that there are the mechanisms in place locally between those stakeholders to take place for a common vision, a common drive to emerge. And I think within that, perhaps a changing role for the local authority, for the LEP, in a new understanding of the role of telecommunications and their importance. And, perhaps they're the roads of the future, as we've just heard. And some variety also in what the need for that is, different types of networks for indoor versus outdoor use, for public and operational solutions using 5G networks, to private networks to support research and development of new ideas, the difference between an urban context and a rural context. And I think in a rural context, really interesting to hear how the diverse needs of farmers, GPs, the emergency services can come together in aggregate to create the business case to deploy the connectivity that they all need. And I think that's one example of some of the positive opportunities you've all spoken about for 5G, from the world's first interactive AR movie to the remote management of forests, consultations with GPs remotely, optimizing manufacturing, to something as prosaic as posting an Instagram photograph of a beautiful place. So just such diversity has been really interesting to hear about. But then also consciousness of the potential risks and negative implications of 5G. We can't leave behind those who aren't able to be involved at the moment. That would have real impacts, and we've seen that recently in people's ability to be educated, to have a job. So I was struck in a conversation with a local authority recently by the number of people who've just never used an internet job site, and how that just excludes people from the opportunities that are there in the economy at the moment. And so addressing that inclusion challenge is about a variety of things we've heard. It's about connectivity and access to it. It's about being able to afford that connectivity, to being able to afford devices, to having the skills to use technology, and just the motivation to want to do so. And this applies to individuals and to businesses. SMEs generally have to focus on their day business. They don't have a lot of ability to focus on something new without understanding clearly what's the benefit of that to me and who's going to be able to help me with it. And I think we've also heard about how some of the infrastructure to support that happening is really very new. It's something that we've been working on in recent years and hasn't been there historically, is having to develop really rapidly. And just a closing thought with that all of this was true before COVID, but COVID has certainly accelerated and emphasized everyone's awareness of it. And perhaps if there's a silver lining in that cloud, it's that our institutional community business leaders are much more aware of the importance of this subject than before, and that we all realize that 5G and digital infrastructures are crucial infrastructures for successful places. So with that, I'd like to thank Colin, Sharon and Callum for some great contributions on the subject. Really interesting to talk to you all. I'd like to thank UK5G for organising the seminar and giving us the opportunity to speak to you. And I'd like to thank everybody listening. And I hope this has been a useful session for you and it's provided some helpful insights. Thank you.